Revenge films.
My name is Thomas Ahab, and I'm 55 years old. Such as I to retire in 5 years, and I have a wife of 26 years, Kira. Usually what happens is that couples prepare for retirement, and once they do, they go on relaxing trips together, or they would find a new sport to keep fit and stay healthy. That wasn't the case for me. Our relationship as husband and wife has now dwindled to nothing. It all started 5 years ago. One day, soon as I just turned 50, I was feeling this slight pain in my chest from the morning, and I felt slightly breathless. But 2 days prior to that, I'd brought in 3 boxes of plastic bottles filled with water from the car, so I thought it was just a muscle strain at first. But by evening, the pain had turned into something violent, like my chest was being carved. It felt like red-hot chopsticks plunged into my heart, and I broke out in a cold sweat from the pain. Little by little, it became harder to breathe, and nausea came along. I couldn't move whatsoever anymore, and I was worried and scared that this pain would actually become the death of me. Shifting in and out of consciousness, the idea of calling an ambulance simply never came to me, and I asked my wife, "My chest hurts. Could you please look for a clinic that takes clients on Sundays and call them about the situation?" She was eating snacks and watching TV at that time. She never stopped moving her hand between her snack and her mouth, and she said,
"Oh, I don't want to do that. Plus, you can talk, so don't you think you can do all that yourself? Go on now."
She gave me my phone. Clutching my chest like it was my life, I searched for a clinic and called them. "Get to a big hospital at once!" That was what the doctor said, and that made me jump. Then I immediately searched for the nearest large hospital and found that it was still pretty far away. My wife doesn't have a driver's license and thus cannot drive. My son can drive, but he was living alone and going to university in another city. Meanwhile, the excruciating pain that had gone on for more than 20 minutes never wavered, and instead kicked up in intensity. I couldn't stand anymore, and I collapsed on the couch. "Call a taxi, please! I can't drive in this condition!" I desperately asked my wife, to which she replied,
What the? You're kidding, right? Do you have any idea how much it would cost driving about 30 minutes by taxi? Get over there with your own car.
Now that I remember all this, I'm so pissed, but at the time I was panicking, so I desperately pleaded, "The money I'll pay out of my own pocket, so please!" By then it was almost impossible to speak as well. Speech became much too painful, so I just lay there and started to moan. My wife, seeing me in such a state, said,
Oh, stop it, silly. It's just a muscle strain.
She was laughing. My mind and my consciousness were a complete mess, and thinking this was starting to get dangerous, in a final attempt at mercy, I blurted, "Call an ambulance, please!"
All right. You want an ambulance, is that it? Jesus.
Then that woman went and started doing her makeup.
Good grief, such a nuisance.
For 10 minutes, she muttered nasty things under her breath. She called 911 after she was done with her makeup. Even while we were waiting for them to arrive, she would say stuff like,
Waiting for an ambulance. How disgraceful. What do you expect me to say to the neighbors if all this just turns out to be a muscle strain?
She was angry, needless to say. But I couldn't get my voice out anymore, and I couldn't say anything back to her. Later, I was taken to the hospital and got an electrodiogram. I was promptly taken to what seemed to be an operating room, and my doctors inserted catheters into the base of my legs. It was a myocardial infarction. Chills descended down my spine when the doctor told me, "You were so strong, not succumbing to the pain for all that time. If it was any longer, it would have been game over." I was also told, "In times like these, do not hesitate to call an ambulance." As I was hospitalized, I had more time than ever to think about many things. My wife and I were arranged to be married. I don't know what she thought of me, but my first impression of her was that she was a simple woman, but still clean and beautiful. She seemed perfect in my eyes. I accepted her wishes of becoming a housewife because she was, quote, weak-minded and easily tired, and I worked my damnedest to never make her do any unnecessary work. I wanted my only child, my son, to go to university too. And although the pay wasn't exactly anything to boast about, I think it was enough to build an ordinary house life. Luckily, I also inherited some land from my parents' will, and we were able to build a house there. I knew my wife couldn't work because of her innate conditions, so I signed myself up for good insurance if the worst ever happened, and they were left alone to survive by themselves. I don't mean to brag, but on our wedding anniversary, I would buy her bouquets, and on her 10th, I got her a ring. I wouldn't know what she thought unless I asked her, but I'm confident that I lived life with my family as my top priority these last 25 years. But this event enabled me to see something clearly for the first time in all these years. It would seem I wasn't as important to her as I'd hoped I was. Luckily, everything went smoothly thereafter, and I left the hospital after 3 weeks. After I left, I started thinking about that day, and about divorce. It wasn't that I didn't have feelings for her anymore after such a long time, but I thought it wouldn't be possible to be with her, and I felt a void whenever I was with her. But my son is still a student. He's living on his own, but soon job hunting and his graduation thesis would make him quite busy, and I didn't want to give more pressure over a divorce. So after I came home, I played the part of her regular husband, and went on living with her as usual. Later, my son got a job and graduated from university. And 3 years later now, after he set himself up nicely in his work, I finally decided to separate from my wife. When I told him, and only him, about my wishes, he said, "You've done all your duties as a parent, Dad. You do what you please. I'm sorry if you were keeping things at bay for my sake, and thanks." What an angel. You know, Mom was like that for a while. She thinks she comes before everything else. I knew from when I was in elementary school. Frankly, I felt ashamed as a parent. Soon after, I filed for divorce. My wife resisted by saying she has no idea the reason why. She's done her duties as a good wife. She doesn't remember any talk about divorce and stuff like that. A few days after that, her elderly mother stopped by and asked after my reasons for divorcing her daughter. When I told her about that day,
I must admit my daughter is at fault, but I don't know if it's solid grounds for divorce.
"Mother, if you were in that situation, would you forgive Kira for acting like she did?" She remained silent when I asked my mother-in-law that question. Even afterwards, my wife started nagging.
I hated when you did that time, or when you said this a few years ago. Nag, nag, nag.
You're in no position to say that.
Why do you say all this now? You could have said all this when it happened. It's usual for a married couple to talk about some things each party didn't approve of. Why do we have to go all the way here?
Good grief, the nagging! It took a while for her to see enough sense to go along with it. We arbitrated and argued for close to 6 months, but I eventually succeeded in dividing the fortune as is legally usual and divorcing her. Our pension would also be divided, and we made the divorce terms agreeable for her. But then she would say,
"You're literally ruining someone's life plan and not doing anything to make repairs." I did my best with the housework and the child upbringing. Normally, I would demand for my share of your severances.
She just wasn't satisfied with the amount that she got, and basically never acknowledged her faults. Never noticing her true colors during these 26 years is probably the biggest mistake here. 6 months after divorcing her, I'm finally getting used to living alone. At first, to lower my hypertension, I was making low-salt meals, which was hard to say the least. But now, since I found out that I can get low-salt meals delivered at regular intervals, I'm doing just that. All I have to do is microwave it once I get home from work. But even so, they're pretty delicious. I'm a simpleton after all. I was busy as a bee, balancing work and household chores. That took a while to get used to. But I feel like my life is a lot more peaceful. As for my ex, I'm kind of relieved to say that she remarried a year after our divorce.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.